Hey guys! So today you and I are going to talk about code bases and whether or not most of them are a mess. So let's get into it. So the question in question was, Frederick, is it true that most code bases are a mess? And I'm gonna just gonna get into it. Yes, absolutely. In fact, there is a very nice saying of the internet. I can't actually remember who said this now, maybe you can. And the saying is that any non-trivial code base has at least one bug. Pretty much. There's a bug in every single system that is non-trivial. And I absolutely believe this to be true. I don't need science to tell me this, because there is enough, I've seen enough systems now, and I've seen the way that we do work in programming, and like most of the industry is doing, and I can tell you for sure that the way that the things are going, there is probably not a single system that doesn't have some type of bug. And if we stretch that one further and say that and we state that there is no such thing as a code base that isn't a mess of some sort, I also believe that to be fairly true. There are definitely projects that are so well maintained that you can't really consider them to be all that much of a mess. But then, that also kind of poses the question, what do you mean by a mess? Is a mess just that there's no logic or no structure or logic, and everything is kind of tangled web of services and entities and stuff like that? Or is a mess that you just have a lot of code and it's very complicated, or like it's a big project? Because then pretty much any large scale project, even the highest quality projects will have a mess, because that's the fundamental problem when you have a complicated problem. Your human primitive little brain can't process the fact that, or rather, it's having troubles processing the complexity, and therefore it feels convoluted. But this is definitely so. And this is one of those things that I think is hard for a lot of beginners to kind of grasp when they start out. You see, when the stuff that you see on the internet, guys, the stuff that you see in tutorials and the stuff that you work on, most likely on your own, they are not even in the same dimension of complexity as the stuff that you're actually going to do in real life. Depending, of course, of where you work, but I'm just going to assume here that the majority of you are going to work on systems that are fairly more complicated, that takes more than a year or two at the very least to develop. And when you do this, then the problem, the reason why these code bases always get to a point where they're kind of messy, is because since there is no one person who can keep an eagle-eyed view of absolutely everything, and you have multiple stakeholders, you have multiple teams of developers and so forth working on that code base, it kind of becomes the situation where, since not one person can keep everything just so, the inconsistency starts to grow. You can think of it sort of as a tree that is growing. So in the very beginning of the tree's lifespan, it's going to start growing straight up to create the trunk of the tree. But as the tree matures, at some point it's going to start creating branches. And that's exactly how this is. That is exactly the same thing with the code base. The branches may go in all kinds of directions because the complexity of the system in this case is growing. And depending on how well you structure things, you might have some branches that are really thick and strong and really well made, and then some branches are kind of just very weak and not really doing so well. And this is a fairly good analogy, I think, to describe the issue and the reason why a code base may feel very weird and feel messy to someone. Because if you have been working on one part of the system, and then you're going to go over to another part of the system, or you're going to have a look at another part of the system, unless that you have some person like a CTO or someone who has made really damn sure that everything is very consistent and everybody has knowledge shared and so forth, then this part of the system is going to be completely fresh to you, and you're going to be in the situation where this kind of feels weird, it feels odd, it feels maybe messy or clunky or something like that, because you you basically have a situation where you might have the same system, but you have different considerations, different people making decisions on behalf of that part of the system. And then the mess really starts when these teams or these parts of the system, they need to start talking to each other. They need to integrate to each other, because integration is one of the messiest and ugliest things that you can do in software development, and that for sure, just hands down. Because basically what that means is that you have a system that was designed from one perspective and another system that was designed from another perspective, and now you need to find some common ground so that these two systems can in an efficient way communicate with each other. Sometimes that's easy depending on how the systems have been developed, but quite often this is a bit of a shit show, because you might have one system that is using XML and one is communicating over JSON, and then you might have one system that needs to do has a REST API, and one system has an RPC API, and you have all of these differences that kind of start piling up. And usually in these situations you get the choice, okay, either you go with one thing or you go with the other, and that's a whole different video of the politics of who's going to decide what's going to happen and what's not going to happen. And sometimes you build something from scratch, or you create a smaller subservice or subset of the features in these services, and then they start talking on more like on some common ground. Maybe if you did have XML on one side, you tell that team to say, or to go, okay, well, you need to create a JSON you need to create a JSON version of this API. But think about that. What then happens on that side of the system is that if you tell them, okay, you've been doing the XML and now you're going to have to do JSON, that creates an inconsistency in their system. So the complexity goes up. But there's nothing they can do, because they need to find some common ground to communicate. So somewhere the logic and decisions of one system is going to leak into the other system. And this is exactly why these systems gets to be this messy, because the only way you could avoid this would be if you were either the absolute best programmer in the world and you could pretty much design a system that was so well made or so generic in the early stages of the project that it's, and then of course only have other developers that really understand exactly how to do this, because that's also a problem. Different people think differently about problems, and to be able to do that it's, as I said, it's almost impossible. And the other way of doing it would be if you had a perfect specification of exactly how this system is going to work forever, pretty much. And that's also impossible, because usually how it works is that you have a business need that is here and now, you build that thing, and then when you ship it, it works, and then like the next quarter you have another business need, and then you have to make decisions based on that. If you're lucky, there's a fairly nice linear progression to all of these new requirements that come into the system, and you can kind of fit the new features into the old way of working. But at some point, some idiot is going to come and say, hey, you know what, we're going to convert all of this to GraphQL. And then you're kind of in a situation where now you have to, now the decisions that you have already made are greatly affected based on these new requirements, right? And if this happens, there's no way for you to foresee that this would happen, and you've made all these other decisions, and now this new decision kind of doesn't fit into the way that everything has been working so far, yet you still have to meet the requirement. So you hack things together, you try to figure out other ways of solving it, and then some person, usually a junior, who starts at this point, like you may have been part of this project for 5, 10 years, 15 years, building this up until such a point, like these branches or this tree has been growing up to such a point, whereas now this junior comes in, looks at the tree, how it looks today, and says, this is really ugly. And the reason why they're correct is because, yes, if you look at it today, if you look at things today, you see all these branches going and like turning and twisting in all kinds of weird manners. And you see, yeah, this isn't all that logical, it doesn't really make sense. But of course it's not going to make sense if your perspective is that the whole thing was designed as one unit of something. But it's not. It's an organically growing system. Every system is organically growing. And that's the thing that makes it almost impossible to make a code base that isn't ugly in some fashion, because to keep it extremely like keeping the code high quality, it requires like either that you, as I said, you have to perfectly plan it, or you have to have requirements that just perfectly always fit into the whole thing, or you need a team of extremely talented gardeners who have like almost endless resources so that they can trim off the bad branches and just restructure things on this tree that we're all growing together, right? So what I want you to take away from this is that it is absolutely true that most of the systems out there in the world, the trivial ones, have a messy code base. But it is also almost impossible to create a system that doesn't have this problem. The only time you can actually keep things elegant and nice and simple is, as I said, if you really invest into it. And no company that I know of, apart from like maybe the top IT companies and the open source projects and so forth, have the sort of resources and time to really try to achieve that. And even they fail in some cases, because that's the equivalent of having all of these different gardeners, like really making sure that everything stays just so, right? And most companies just don't, I mean, they need to ship things, they need to move quickly. And when you want to do that, you're gonna have branches that's gonna fork off in all kinds of directions. And the only other way you can keep it elegant is if your tree is very small. If you have a very small project, if it doesn't grow all that big, then it's just gonna stay the way it is. But when the tree grows really, really big, it's kind of inevitable that you're gonna get this problem. So hopefully this made sense to you. Have a great day.